So you would have seen that pyramid I made in my previous videos. If you haven't seen that, go ahead and watch the couple of last videos now, where I mentioned the hobbyist breeders and how they can actually make money, a little bit extra money on the side, whilst actually breeding to a high welfare standard. Now before we get into this, just want a disclaimer, I am sick. My throat feels like sandpaper. It's not COVID, I've just got a cold. But if you see lots of these learning from other keepers back to back, that's because I can't talk for very long. So having these videos where the person talks for the majority of it allows me to actually put out content. So I'm going to pivot here and put out these types of videos until I feel better, and then they're going to be mixed in with the other content. But that's what we're doing for now. So without further ado, let's pick the brains of an experienced keeper. Okay, cool. Well, thank you for coming, Ashley. Thank you for giving us your time and ability to pick your brain. What I would love for you to start off with is who are you and what it is you do?
So my name is Ash or Ashley. I own a shop in Grimsby. I've had that for 6 years tomorrow. I also am a lecturer at the local college, where I predominantly teach animal welfare on a variety of different subjects as well. At the moment, we're focusing more on exotics and stuff, which is obviously my forte. So yeah, that's what I do. I've also been a part recently of creating educational material for students to use. So things like how to handle large constrictors, how to health check small primates, that type of thing. So yeah, that's what I do.
So the thing that I wanted to pick your brain on specifically is I know that you're breeding quite a lot in your shop, and I know that you're doing this to quite a high breeding standard. So is there anything in particular that you think is a difference in the animals you're producing at a higher welfare standard of keeping compared to what was traditionally used in sort of rack style systems, etc.?
The evidence that I've got is purely anecdotal. So there's no real hard evidence behind it. However, I do feel that it's something that should be explored moving forward due to my findings, kind of my hypothesis in a sense. I've never really subscribed to keeping snakes in racks. It's just something that hasn't really sat well with me. However, which way you dress it up as, high enrichment racks, anything like that, it's for me, offering things like royal pythons, for example, the ability to climb, which has obviously been documented in their natural history, is a very big, important part, I feel. So I keep mine in 4-foot enclosures with access to the shade dweller from Arcadia and halogen basking spots, so they can thermoregulate appropriately, with access to climbing materials, multiple hides, that type of thing. So I've been keeping this way with UVB and more decor-wise in the enclosures for about 3 years, technically 2, because we'll just discount Miss Rona. Yeah, well, coronavirus, we'll just discount that. So yeah. So, but realistically, actual breeding properly in this type of setup has been about 2 years. So from my findings, so probably need some backstory of what I actually breed. It's all the common stuff. So bearded dragons, royal pythons, crested geckos, leopard geckos, corn snakes, that type of thing. Nice, easy, bog standard stuff. Your bread and butter stuff that you'd sell in a shop, really. When it comes to the snakes, we've been offering UVB for the past couple of years, as I was just saying. And I have found that not only the clutch sizes are a little bit larger. I mean, I'm not talking double in clutch size. So not the royal pythons aren't going from 8 to 16, 24 eggs. It's just a couple. However, it is a marked difference. And this is from the same animals as well that I have been breeding prior. So I personally feel, again, it's purely anecdotal. So I'm not saying it is the core, the cause, but knowing how UVB actually works. So with the UVB going to, the vitamin D3 going to every organ, helps obviously in cell function, obviously your immune response, growing the actual embryos as well, and the overall fertility of animals. It would be something we as keepers would be very silly to scoff at, and just go, no, whatever, no, this is fine, this is how it is. At the end of the day, you're not only increasing the animal's welfare, from my point of view anyway, you're also potentially increasing the profitability as well from your clutch size. So if the first year you were to add UVB, so let's see, a 24 watt Pro T5 kit, for example, it's around about 60, 70 quid, thereabouts. Especially with the price hikes in royal pythons and corn snakes, you could realistically have an additional egg, and that's covered for that whole year. So when you go to the next year, you see an increase, then you just need to replace the bulb, which is £30. So that one bulb has increased your profit margins in a sense. And as well, increasing the animal's welfare, which ultimately is something that we're all kind of aiming to go towards, really. So yeah, but this is purely anecdotal. I don't want to say it's hard facts or anything like that. However, I'm saying it's something we should definitely look at and consider moving forward.
So would you consider it to be quite consistent in the marginal increases then? Or would you say it's one every now and again, a couple of clutches here and there that are increased? Or is it like near enough increased size in every clutch you get, even though it's marginal, you say?
I would say that, yeah, it is an increase in clutch size in literally every single animal. Two of our animals this year have actually double clutched. And the animal one of the animals the year before double clutched again. So I would really suggest this is something that we should definitely look into 100%.
So these individuals that have double clutched then, were these double clutching before the introduction of UV? Was that commonplace for those?
No. So before I added UVB to snakes and leopard geckos as well, to be quite fair, but obviously double clutch you can't really do with leopard geckos. But with the snakes, definitely. I think I had a handful of double clutches throughout the years as well of me breeding reptiles. So I've been doing it for quite a long time. But this is the first time where it's happened more often, and I am linking that to the addition of the UVB inside the enclosures for the animal. But it could be a number of things. It could be the fact I've added in climbing pieces of decor in there for them as well. But yeah, or it could be all of the things. It could be UVB, branches, places to appropriately thermoregulate, giving those appropriate cool spots and really warm spots, giving them that visible light spectrum as well, because obviously we do try and have the visible light in there as well. So we've got the UVB, we've got jungle dawns in there as well, and we've also got halogen basking spot bulb as well. So we're trying to cover the full spectrum of visible light. So yeah.
So it's really interesting then, because obviously you can make an argument, oh, these might be just some individuals with a genetic disposition to double clutching, but if they weren't before, then something in the husbandry there may be like causing that. Obviously, because you've changed everything at once, you can't necessarily link that to one variable. But I think if the overall trend in husbandry, we could just say let's seek higher levels of welfare, then it will be interesting to see what people who are breeding will achieve. Like myself, I want to breed the snakes that I have, but I obviously have not been, I have not kept without the UV and the near infrared and halogens and things like that. So I have no yields or anything to compare it to from before. So it would be interesting to see once we get to a stage where more people who are breeding quite substantially start to experiment and then see what they come out with. Because I'm noticing a trend right now where keepers like yourself, and Francis and TC Houston from Reptile Mountain all are experiencing a similar trend where these increases in UV and welfare and stuff are leading to larger clutch sizes and larger litters of skinks, for example. So that's really interesting. I obviously made a video where I explained the difference between the big breeder businesses up here and obviously the hobbyist breeder down here. Now, it's something that I think will be more commonplace going forward, where the hobbyist breeder takes up a large proportion of the market of animals being produced. And with higher welfare levels, what we could be seeing here is more animals produced by less breeding adults, but just in higher welfare conditions. Some of these keepers are obviously concerned with not being able to make money keeping to the high welfare standard. Are you having any issues with that commercially yourself, or are you financially indifferent?
Well, I've definitely not seen a negative impact at all. It's really difficult to say though, because at the minute, especially these past couple of years, with the price hikes in snakes and whatnot, I think that's helped as well. So obviously, normal corn snakes used to sell them for about £25. They're now wild type. This is they're now £70-80. I mean, at the Doncaster Reptile Show recently, I was told that a juvenile wild type, and it was a wild type, was sold for £120. So yeah. So it is what it is. I feel if we were to keep the prices as they were before, then I think it would be an argument potentially against higher welfare. However, with the increase of clutch sizes and as well the increase of healthier babies, which is something not really touched upon either, then the potential is there. The argument is there to do breeding at a higher welfare, because you've got healthier babies, healthier clutch sizes, that type of thing. But at the moment, because this type of thing is still kind of in its infancy, we're not going to know until one, prices potentially come down as well with coronavirus. Because the thing is, we have to be realistic. I mean, I'm pro welfare. However, coronavirus and Brexit are factors that are contributing to the price of animals at the moment anyway. So it's something that we need to be aware of. We can't just go into it, oh, well, there we go. Yeah, it's absolutely fine. No, we need to come at this argument with a clear head and a scientific head at that as well, and go, well, these are the factors. Let's have a look at this further.
Yeah, I think going forward, a lot of keepers are going to at least start probing at this and seeing where they can take this. Even if it's just one variable, like the addition of UVB, rather than like an entire new system in place. I think the more this goes on, the more we're going to see some sort of reliable feedback from people breeding. It's interesting that you say that you had like healthier offspring. What are you defining as healthier in particular?
So, I mean, I feel I've been quite lucky anyway in terms of genetic abnormalities. I've not really had that many, obviously, unless you're counting morphs in there. But you know, okay, it is what it is. But that's something I'd like to talk about later on, actually. To be fair. So obviously we weigh the animals when we're doing feed charts and stuff like that, just to make sure that they're not losing weight once they've hatched. We also note down what they're feeding. So with royal pythons, for example, you actually helped me out with this, with the video on like the different prey items and stuff like that. So thank you very much. But offering more of like a avian based diet for picky feeders So instead of going through the process of braining, soaking them in tuna juice, that kind of thing, we saw a lot easier take up as well of these different prey items. The babies as well were kept under UV. Sheds as well. I know royal pythons are renowned, some royal python morphs as well are renowned for having poor shed. The shed success rate was pretty good. I mean, they're only kept at around about 60% humidity, 60 to 70% humidity as well. So nothing too crazy or out there. Obviously, they had the addition of hides, humid hides and whatnot. I use a mixture of topsoil, sphagnum moss, and vermiculi as well in there. But yeah, I think the overall health of the babies that we've had has been fantastic. I think with this year, out of all the royal pythons that we've produced, I think we've only had 3 that didn't make it, 2 of which were in the egg anyway. And one of them died shortly after it hatched. Corn snakes, that this year was 100% success rate. We had any weaklings, any died, and visually as well. They visually look larger. Like, I've been breeding corn snakes for years, and these past 2 years when I've been keeping them under UV, these shoelaces are looking incredibly thick compared to what they have been in the past.
A bit more robust then.
Yeah.
It's interesting because you've obviously, again, that's a lot of variables you've changed there. So again, difficult to isolate. So with the including the avian prey in the diet, was that only Regis, or did that have an effect on a multitude of different species?
It was a multitude of different species. As well, we, instead of doing it weekly, we mixed it up. So we would give them a large prey item 1 week, and then wait maybe 10 or so days, and then we'd give them 2 smaller feeds in quite succession with each other. Again, varying in the prey size. So frogs' legs as well, meat off the frogs' legs. We've given obviously quail, parts of chicks, mice and rats, more parts of multi-mammoths, that kind of thing. And again, with royals being renowned to being picky feeders, we've literally had next to no issues whatsoever in terms of feeding, by feeding this way as well. But again, a lot of variables, difficult to isolate, but it may be a mixture of all of them potentially. So basing it off the animal's natural history. So in the wild, they're not going to be feeding on just one prey item. They're not going to have that prey item offered to them once a week or once every 5-10 days, whatever your feeding regimes are. And again, they're going to have access to UV, different kinds of heating, different humidities. So I think maybe basing things back to, well, basically just going back to nature, in a sense, have a look, see how she does it, and then try and replicate it as best we can.
Obviously, I have not bred Regis. So what were the issues you were running into previously to your changes in husbandry? Were you having quite common issues with getting them feeding? Or is it a drastic difference after you made these changes, or is it just marginal?
Oh, no, like definitely 100%. It was literally the clutch I had before keeping on UV. They were difficult feeders, very difficult. But the clutches I've had since, when keeping under UV, and keeping the animals themselves under UV, has been completely different. I mean, of course, you're going to get the odd 1 or 2 that are picky feeders, but I think the odd 1 or 2 out of, let's say, 89 snakes that I produce, I don't really think that's a bad ratio. And as well, it cuts down on time. So you're not there. And as well, cuts down how invasive you have to be. So if you're force feeding the animal as well, it cuts down on that, cuts down on stress. Yeah. I feel it is a must.
It's almost as if the investment into UV and the provision of UV is actually an investment in your own time and the time you spent trying to force feed individuals. So that's really interesting. So I would say I would like to experiment that with parting a clutch of king snakes, but I don't think I'm going to have trouble getting king snakes to start feeding, to be fair.
Yeah, I mean, the corn snakes, obviously, that we've had, I've never really had any issues with corn snakes. But I would say it would be a marginal increase with the corns. Because again, I've had 900% success rate with corn snakes throughout the years anyway. But I have noticed a slight difference. Maybe I have to take in my own biases into account at this point as well. Maybe I'm putting all my eggs in one basket and go, oh, well, this is definitely why. I think it's something that even though I've had 2 seasons with UVB and with breeding, it would be something that we would have to look at over multiple seasons to see if we are getting these same results, in case it's just me being a UVB weirdo.
I think what would be really interesting would be if you, next season, if you separated off X individuals of hatchlings, kept them without UV, and then X individuals of Regius with UV, and then you could take measurements of accepted feeds. So you could have like a count of accepted or rejected feed, and then you could see a difference between the 2 groups. You could also do length measurements and weight measurements weekly or something, and see if there's a difference between that, see if it affects growth. Because obviously the theory is obviously having the UV will allow them to metabolize that calcium and put on structure on their bones a lot easier. So it would be interesting to see that be done.
It'd be interesting to see length and weight as well, in terms of not being overweight. With obviously like power feed, because I know quite a lot of Royal Python breeders still do like to power feed like their babies to get them through. And yeah, there we go, done. There we go. That's it. Thank you. Bye-bye. See you later. But I think maybe taking that extra time and care with them. So we have a policy of 4 feeds and 4 sheds. That's just like a standard rule. However, if the animal is looking a bit peaky, then we'll keep it obviously back for a little bit longer. So even if it has had these 4 feeds and 4 sheds, then we'll just keep it back. Okay, you don't look too great. We'll see if there's anything underlying here. I mean, we've only had to do that a couple of times throughout the years, but it's still a measure that's important, I feel.
Yeah, it's interesting with the power feeding. Obviously, you're taking that alternative approach by really randomizing when you're offering feeds. So I want to get into that a little bit in more detail. Why is it that you actually randomize feeds and feed types? What's your main strategy behind that?
Well, there are 2. So first one is, because I'm a natural bug, is taking note of the animal's natural history and knowing that feeds won't be available once a week, that kind of thing. But the second point, which is something that I've only recently, in the past like couple of years that I've come to, is that potentially, against another hypothesis of mine, potentially the snakes get used to routine. And in the wild, there is no routine. It's either you eat or you don't. If you don't, you potentially die. And having those natural instincts potentially placed back into the animal, where it's like, oh, I don't know, when's my next feed going to be? Maybe that as well. So they're a bit more ready to take the food when you have them. I mean, of course, the odd occasion, they're like, no, I'm not really hungry, thank you very much. But it's very rare where we have a consistent non-feeder, very rare. And as well, you could potentially chalk it up to enrichment. You could make that link as well, maybe, especially like with the different prey items and stuff being introduced to like different smells, that type of thing. So a lot of olfactory enrichment going off.
So I think it's really important here to stipulate that you're not, in case anyone gets the wrong end of the stick here, that you're not starving animals to make them hungrier to get them to feed every time. What you're being is sporadic with the times you offer feed. So it's almost like a fear of missing out. So they'll take it because they don't know when the next meal is going to be, rather than being like a set routine. They're like, oh, I know the next one's coming, I'll skip this one.
Yeah.
So just want to put that out there in case everyone's like, oh my God, he's starving the snakes to make them hungrier. No, that's not what you meant. But yeah, I got it. I just want to make sure everyone got that.
Yeah. No. So one quail, leave it a week or so, maybe 10 days, then quick succession, 2 small pinky mice within a week, then leave it again. And then that's just an example. But also frogs' legs as well for larger stuff. And whatnot. I think we to be fair, we feed quite a wide variety of prey items. To be fair, I think that's very important as well. So, but yeah, I know obviously you've done videos before on like monoculture, like diets and whatnot. But I suppose each to their own. As long as the animals are getting those nutrients, it doesn't, in a sense, doesn't really matter. And the argument to be made for randomized and varied feeding would be for just natural history and enrichment purposes.
Yeah, I think obviously some prey items are going to have higher elevations of certain nutrients than others. I mean, personally, from my own research, I've seen that there are higher levels in X over the adult mouse. So I don't necessarily think you're going to kill your snake, obviously, by having this monoculture mouse diet. But I definitely think this varied diet is like hedging your bets against not having this amount of this certain nutrient. If you vary things up, I think you're basically just giving yourself a nice safety blanket of things being provided. Obviously, all of this come down to husbandry, but one thing we haven't discussed is incubation. That's something that I'm really interested in. I see a lot of people saying that lower incubation methods can increase the size of the neonate that comes out, but also means like a longer wait time. Have you experimented with like temperatures for incubation at all?
Not as such. No, it's not something that I've been like, oh, okay, let's try this out. It's something that I definitely want to try in the future as well. But I think I kind of play it safe depending on what obviously it is I'm incubating. I kind of go for like a mid range, especially for those species that are dependent on the sex, depends on obviously what temperature they're incubated at. I kind of go for a middle range, so the potential there to have a mixed male and female, because there's something that we don't want is to flood the hobby with 100% males or 100% females. We kind of want that nice mixture going, but as opposed to incubating like the substrate and incubation medium that I use, I've experimented with that quite a lot. So I've used topsoil in the past. I've used vermiculi, what's it bloody called? Hatchright, that kind of stuff. Sphagnum moss as well. So they all, to be fair, they all near enough, in my opinion, and from my experience, they all near enough have the exact same outcome as well. I think we get a higher yield with a mixture of hatchright and vermiculi than we do with sphagnum moss and topsoil. But this could be down to bacteria or fungi that may be within like the moss and the soils and whatnot. But yeah, it is marginal. I mean, now I've stopped experimenting. I tend to use vermiculi as a base, and then on top I tend to sprinkle hatchite and then put my trays on top that way.
So for like your typical like corn snake, what are you incubating at 28 degrees?
Yeah. Yeah.
About that, yeah.
Anyway, well, to be fair, I let it fluctuate as well. To be fair, so
Really,
just depends on it depends on like what I'm feeling. If I'm like, I'll turn it down a bit, turn it down a couple of degrees, or I'll turn it up. Not obviously like drastic amounts, and not like all the time where it's like, hey, you're on, you're off, you're on, you're off. Like, but have it so it's a little bit different because obviously in the wild they're not really going to be incubated at like a straight 28 degrees throughout. So I think that's just me being me, really. I'm not sure. Maybe it has another factor to play in the babies and whatnot. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe I should do a bit of a study where I'm using the method that I've always used of turning them up and down, and then control it, and then have them at just a constant temperature, see what I get. But yeah, I think when it comes to incubation and stuff, I think more research is definitely needed. But I think the research needs to be taken over a number of years and not just off one or two or even three clutches that you get.
So this is something that your average hobbyist, if they were really passionate and they wanted to do things, they could do this at home. I'm not saying that every journal is going to accept a paper written by just someone with a pet snake, but as like data that you want to give to other hobbyists, that's actually something a bit more solid. Every keeper could be doing that. So what sort of range are you seeing as permissible then? Are you going up to like 30 or are you going down to 25? Where are you going with this?
Well, it's very dependent on the species. So with things that incubate at lower temperatures, so things like crested geckos, for example, I have in the past for a couple of days gone down to about 16 degrees and then rocked it back up again. Yeah, it is all dependent on the species. And I think as well, it depends on your experience and your knowledge as well of those animals. I mean, I wouldn't be recommending going and turning off your incubators or turning down your incubators if it's the first time that you've done it. Maybe start out, get some success in like your small batch breeds, whatever you're deciding to breed, and then experiment. I mean, when you were talking about a couple of seconds ago, literally about data, it's up to us as hobbyists to collect this data. Like every single thing we have on lighting and heating and natural history realistically has been conducted by hobbyists. So, and there isn't really that much information out there with stuff like this. So I think it's up to us to try and find out, try and have a bit of a play about. And as well, not to be biased in your findings. Like you don't do something to, well, I suppose you do, you do scientific testing to prove your point is correct, but don't let that be the be all and end all of it. If you get a different result, you roll with that result.
Yeah, I really agree with that. It's important to actually go with the data that you take rather than just try and force your data to align with what you've got in your preconceived idea. Obviously, going into that, then a big thing in incubating and stuff is the cutting of eggs. Now, you're obviously getting obviously a few that didn't make it out of the eggs. Do you cut at all, or is it just purely allowing them to do whatever happens?
So I allow them to do what they want and go through the natural processes and stuff. If they go over by 2 to 3 weeks, that deadline where they've all like the siblings and stuff have hatched, then I will cut. And 9 times out of 10, the eggs that are left are not okay. They have died in the egg. So I don't cut. I mean, I can't really say is cutting a good or a bad thing. I don't really have an opinion on it. I just feel that personally, to me, let nature do its thing. If that animal was going to come out the egg, let it come out the egg. If it's not, that's it. I know it's very Darwinian, but I think it needs to, because you're then perpetuating genes of an animal that may, in the future, if it is bred, where the full clutch could have this problem. So it's something that we need to be aware of. Not every snake or every lizard in the egg, if it doesn't hatch, it is viable. If that makes sense.
Yeah,
So we need to be careful what we're putting in.
Yeah, it's definitely a difficult line to tread. I mean, I know some people say that if like the first one's pipped and come out in after like 2 to 3 days, they aren't all out, they'll start cutting. But I wonder if those ones that are three weeks after you cut, I wonder if you cut after a couple of days, they would have been alive. Now, that's a case of, well, are they going to have genetic issues? The fact they didn't hatch anyway, but I don't know. It's difficult, isn't it? I suppose one argument is you could say, well, I could cut them and let them come out, and then if they have any issues, I can cull. Then I can take that decision there. But you can't necessarily cull if you don't know what's inside, if that makes sense. Obviously, abnormalities that are visible, that's a lot easier. I suppose you could go off like feeding, like readiness to feed and vigor, but it's I don't know. You can't really determine genetics with that. So I don't know how I feel either. So I guess, let's say something comes out and then you think, okay, I need to cull this. Then it's the ethical dilemma of how are you going to cull this animal? Is it better of it to have just not been born or like not made it out of the egg? Then now how are you going to? It's a welfare issue, isn't it? I mean, I suppose the one way that I would probably cull is just give it to an adult king snake, but then that's a welfare issue. Being eaten alive is being eaten alive any better than dying in the egg? I don't know. It's very difficult, isn't it?
It is. It is a very difficult topic. I mean, the ones that I have seen that have died in the eggs, I mean, some of them visibly have not had anything wrong with them, but some of them have had kinks in their spine, in their tail. This was before, like a couple of years ago. Polycephaly as well. So when they've got two heads, I've had that a couple of times. And they've not been produced. They've just died in the egg. Really cool, like to see it happen and whatnot. But if I'd have cut that, would that animal then have been able to eat and survive? And then you go into the whole ethics dilemma of what do you do with a two-headed animal? Do you let it live or do you kill it? It's a very difficult one, really. So that's why I take the stance of let nature do what it needs to do, really.
So would you say that you were having more not pip before you introduced all the UV and such to the breeding adults?
That is a very good question. One of which, you see, I'd like to say we didn't get as many pip in, but it was roughly about the same, to be fair. There's nothing that I can say, oh, yeah, they all pipped and they all did this since being added under UV. That's not the case. I think afterwards, maybe the health of the babies. Sorry, I see my phone was going off then. I think maybe the health of the babies after they pipped is something to look at. Maybe, I mean, I would have to go have a look at my records to see how many came out of the egg before having UVB. But I would say off the top of my head, it's very difference between the two of them actually coming out of the egg. Health of the animal, completely different story, but them actually popping out of the egg, roughly about the same.
I think this is where being very meticulous with your data recording can make a difference down the line to your husband decisions. I think I don't think it's very scientific to say yes, definitely this is a factor, but I think my personal opinion, I think I obviously know all the welfare benefits to UV and stuff, but I think it's probably wise to do everything you can to avoid the ethical scenario, whether you not let it pip or you cut or not in the first place. If something may have a marginal difference in stopping things being kinked and stuff, then I think it'd be wise to go down that route. And if it happens, then it happens. But
yeah,
I think
and as
that's
well, it depends on the genes of your animals as well. So, for example, we bred wild type. Sorry, the phenotype was wild type on one of the animals. The other was anery. This is in corn snakes. And we got a mixed bag of babies from that, all healthy and whatnot, nothing wrong with them at all. But there were no wild types and there were no aneries present within that clutch, like at all. I've bred aneries and normals before and know what animals to expect out of a clutch like that, but I think this is the issue with like the hobby of breeding and whatnot is people have just gone into it blind and go, oh, I'll breed that with that. And then we've got animals that are presenting one way but have underlying things another. Now, I'm not saying, well, the whole debate on morphs and whatnot will forever range and forever go on. Like to take a stand back from it. I think some morphs are obviously worse than others, but it is what it is at the end of the day. But the anecdote that we can take away from this is that we don't know what the animal is carrying genetics wise. So if we can do things to promote healthier animals from that, then I'm all for it.
I think one thing that Americans do better than us in our hobby is they're very good at tracking lineage and having records of that. I think in the UK it's quite, well, I produce these animals. I think that's as far as it goes. But I think it's difficult because you get a lot that's like a byproduct from morph breeding projects. Say these hets and things that are just sold as wild type. So you want a wild type because you want to produce wild types, and then you get all these other stuff that perhaps you don't want to have. That's something that I worry about. If it's something that I ever wanted to produce, and then I ended up with albinism in some of the neonates, I wouldn't want that. So I really don't want that to happen. So it's an issue, isn't it? Really, when you can't control what you're going to get out. Do you think you've seen any difference between like wild type, typical phenotypes in terms of health between different morphs?
Oh yeah, 100%. Like, and I'm not. It's really difficult because I don't want to come across as anti-morph, etc., etc. I'm not anti it in like per se.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've made the mistake with dogs in terms of brachiocephalic animals, so like pugs and whatnot, having those shorter snouts and having those health issues that are now being discussed. We've done that with dogs and we keep doing it to other animals. And obviously in our hobby, it's snakes and geckos and whatnot. And obviously it's been proven. So it's a really, really difficult thing. For me, if a morph is not inhibiting an animal in any way in terms of its absorption of UV, how much UV it can absorb, how it thermoregulates, how it feeds, etc., then I don't necessarily have a problem with it. The problems that I have is when you're breeding animals that absorb potentially too much UV or not enough, or have an aversion to light, so things like albinos and whatnot. I think that's when it runs into spicy territory, really.
Yeah,
So
I'm kind of in the same boat. I'm not necessarily anti-morph, although sometimes I think people think I come off as that. I'm
yeah,
just very pro-welfare, and I think I'm not fond of something like albinism if it's going to cause adverse effects welfare-wise. Something like
yeah,
hypo, I mean, a hypo boa, like you got things like Hog Island boa, which is arguably very, very similar, like a reduced amount of melanin. So I can't particularly say that's going to be a massive welfare issue. So, and it isn't, I'm very poor on morphs, so I have no interest, but isn't hypo dominant as well?
I'm exactly the same. I couldn't give a shit about morphs if I'm being honest with you. It's like it is what it is. Like, I'm like, oh, whatever. Like, you
Yeah.
see, that's the point. And like, I think I'm very much like you. I'm not, in a sense, anti-morph. I mean, it's important to point out things, but I think us pointing things out may come across as anti this or anti that. But you've got to, so obviously we come from like quite heavily educated like backgrounds. Obviously you went to uni, I went to uni, I'm a lecturer, that kind of thing. So we have to look at it on a level playing field. And just because you like something does not necessarily mean that it's correct. And you have to look at it and point out the flaws. Because if you don't point out the flaws, then in this case, we're talking about the hobby, then the hobby will stagnate as it is doing. And then you're going to create infighting, that kind of thing. So if everybody attacks it from the same thing of going, what can I do better? Or I don't think that's quite right. Let me look at this. I think that's the difference, and that's the point. So I'm not anti. The only thing I'm really anti about is keeping beautiful snakes in racking systems. I think it's barbaric. That's it. But they still have their place. I understand that completely before people start having a pop off and whatnot. Like, I completely understand. And you throw the whole high enrichment stuff at me, or what about quarantine? Yes, of course, it's a completely different topic from that. Like, your quarantine, for example, animals are going to be in there for a couple of months. There we go, making sure they're all right, not spreading any pathogens to your collection, etc., etc. Breeding animals permanently in tiny tubs, different story. Completely different story.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've kind of lost track where I went off on that one then.
Yeah,
so,
that's
sorry.
okay. One thought that I had is the difference between dominant traits and recessive. If it's recessive morph, that does encourage some inbreeding to kind of like skip steps to get the animals up quicker. So I'm not particularly fond of things that are recessive that encourage that mentality, but if it's something that obviously doesn't intrude on their ability to use resources like radiation, UV, etc., and it is dominant, so you're not exactly encouraging inbreeding to such mass extent, then I'm not particularly against it. Just to double back, so when I asked the question about the difference in health between the two, what are we defining as the difference in health? What is healthier about these normals compared to the morphs that you're producing?
Readiness to take feeds, length and growth rates as well. They're completely different. Like, they are realistically completely different. I mean, some morphs obviously do better than others, but I think on a whole, wild types do tend to do better. And I personally believe, again, anecdotal, not saying it's a fact, I think the reason for that is because Mother Nature knows best. Really, these animals have been around for millions of years, literally millions of years. Obviously, not specific corn snakes. I'm not really know how far the natural history of corn snakes goes back.
I think it would be millions, to be fair. In terms of
Yeah.
evolution, millions isn't really that long, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, even common ancestors of corn snakes. There we go. I've got that bracket in there now, so I can't get shouted at. But yeah, they've been around for millions of years. They've evolved that way due to their environment. That's it.
Another question I was going to ask is obviously a big motivation for producing morphs is money. Obviously, you're running a commercial thing, so are you seeing a difference between the amount of morphs purchased versus normals, or are you seeing any sort of trend of people actually seeking normals?
If we were to have this conversation 4 to 5 years ago, then it was all morph, 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 morph. Over the past couple of years, I've personally seen a decline in people wanting morphs through various reasons. Price as well, prices in there. It's a factor we can't take out. But I don't think they're as glorified as what people once thought they were. People now know what they are, I think, as well. People are just going to see, oh, pretty snake, want it. But yeah, I think it's obviously morphs are still popular. I'm not going to say they're not. I'm not like everyone wants wild types now. It's really weird. Like that's not the case. But I've definitely seen an increase in wanting wild types. Especially with leopard geckos, actually, to be fair, especially with leopard geckos. More so the locales of leopard geckos as well. So Macularis afghanis, the Macularis montanus as well. That's the new one that's really gone quite well in recent years, to be fair, really well. So yeah, and I think the localities, you can get different colors in the locales and whatnot. So I think that's what people are looking at as well. Okay, animals relatively healthy, and as well, different options other than, let's say, leopard geckos, for example. If they want a darker leopard gecko, why not go for an African fat tail? And people are doing that as well. So yeah.
Yeah, I think a trend in the hobby that I would like to see is hobbyist breeders focusing on health. Whether that means to you avoiding morphs or not, that's entirely up to you. But I think localities is something that's really interesting because there's two sides to the coin here. I think if you focus on localities, one, you're getting those different phenotypes and looks anyway, which offers that variety that morphs were giving. I think if the hobby focuses on localities, let's say you're keeping one locality and I'm keeping a different locality, and it's the same species, but in 5 years' time, there's a taxonomic revision, and it turns out that it's two separate species. Well, now we haven't hybridized two species now. We've technically got two different species still in the hobby. So when you focus on locality, of course, area is area. Where the origins of that species is from is always going to be the same on the map. So by focusing on locality, I think the hobby is making a... I was going to use a phrase that I didn't know how to use properly then. I think it's preservation of something that might actually be a different species down the line, or even a subspecies. Yeah. So I think that is more interesting to me than morphs. But on the flip side, if there's relatively few founder animals for a locality, then if you're desperate to stick to a locality, then that could encourage inbreeding as well. If you've got a lot of animals in the morph game now, arguably the genetic pool of these morph populations are actually larger than the localities in captivity. So it's culture, isn't it? If we started from the start and we focused on localities from the beginning, then I'd imagine the founder animals and the stock taken from the wild and actually in the breeding population would have been much larger. So I don't know whether cultural change is ever going to change that, but I think that's really interesting. That.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd hope that it changes. I mean, especially recently, with certain charities going with each other and whatnot. I think it's a scary time. at the minute, and I don't think people realize how scary this is. I mean, obviously you had the, what was it, the Lacey Act in America. Everyone was like, never happen, absolutely fine, or something along those lines. And then there were these blanket bans of all these species, and what? Why? You know? And I think we need to realistically look at ourselves, and it starts everywhere. It starts with people like me that sell animals to people. I think the whole reform, I mean, AAL, I mean, realistically, it didn't change at all for me. We did literally the majority of what was asked anyway. I think the only things that we weren't doing were taking daily temperature, humidity, and UVI reads. It may be different, obviously, per like council and whatnot, but for us, we had to do.
Yeah, when I was in
had
the
to
shop,
do.
we had to do that as well.
Yeah,
Which I think is
so
far fetched. You're not going to lose any UVI in a day.
yeah, gotta get that 5 star. But yeah, so it changed. It changed with us. Um, we didn't really see anything bad from it, apart from the costs increasing on the actual license itself. It was this AAL licensing was supposed to destroy pet shops, not just just to sell reptiles, but pet shops in general. It's supposed to absolutely destroy them, and we came out absolutely fine. Some shops didn't make it, but that is what it is. And some shops preemptively closed because they thought the licensing was worse than what it was. But I mean, again, just a bit of a disclaimer before anybody starts kicking off. I am not advocating for the government to get involved in our hobby. Not what I'm advocating whatsoever. I would much prefer if we were all grown up enough to do it ourselves. I would much prefer that. But with the way things are going at the moment, getting a bit spicy, getting a bit touch and go, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I mean, I've recognised this, and it's making me quite nervous now. And I've obviously been making the past couple of videos with quite an urgency to how I'm saying things. I'm like, okay, this is now or never sort of thing. And for the most part, people understand the points I'm making, but I think some people maybe got the wrong end of the stick. And yeah, we're not asking for the government to get involved. That's literally the opposite of what we want. We just
Yeah,
recognize that for the problem to go away, we need to address the root cause of the problem. And
yeah,
obviously, I for one think that breeding to a higher welfare standard and having higher standards for our breeding animals is one way to show responsibility in the hobby. I don't know how you feel about that.
yeah, 100%. I mean, we got rid of puppy mills. I mean, what are rack keepers? I'm going to get shot for this, but you know, it is what it is. It's just the snake version of a puppy mill, in my opinion. Really.
Yeah, so the AAL, obviously that has had relatively little effect on you, which means you're already keeping to quite a high standard and breeding at quite a high standard beforehand, meaning it wasn't that much of a financial burden to you, surely, if you were
Yeah.
surviving quite well.
No, it wasn't. I mean, we were keeping all our animals on UV. We've had a UV vertebrate policy for Christ. I think that for the past 4 years. So any vertebrate that leaves the shop has to be sold with UV. Um, and from the shop that I worked at prior, where that policy wasn't in place, we don't get as many, or it's died, or it's this, or something's wrong with it. We set the stall out. This is our expectations. Let's try and lift it. So when we're selling animals in general, we'll obviously give them like the bare minimum. So bearded dragon, it's recommended like a 4 foot by 2 foot by 2 foot. However, if you can go bigger, 100% go bigger. So instead of aiming those minimum standards as a goal, we've kind of reframed it as this is your starting point. Let's go further from there.
Which is what the word minimum always meant in the first place.
Yeah, yeah. So our minimum, it'd be fine. It's due. Oh my God, yes, this is the bare minimum. Like no one ever does that. Like, yeah, I'm there. I don't need to improve anymore. I've met the bare minimum. I mean, well, to be fair, some people do that, but you know, I think in general, you shouldn't. It's all about improving yourself. And the more we improve yourself, the more we improve the hobby as well. So
thank you very much for your time after I've had my choking fit. That was really good, and it's really good to hear from someone who's doing this commercially to install that hope from someone who is looking to make money, if that's what their goal is, that you can keep a higher welfare standard and actually make money. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for coming on.
No worries. Thank you very much.